What if I told you the clothes you're wearing right now are more than just a fashion statement? They're a secret code, a time capsule, even a weapon of change. Throughout history, clothing has held a power far beyond mere protection from the elements. It's been a silent negotiator of social hierarchies, a bold declaration of rebellion, and even a catalyst for revolutions. Think about it, the flowing linen of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh wasn't just fabric, it was a visual decree of divinity. The suffragettes' white dresses weren't just stylish, they were a uniform of defiance. Every stitch, every fold, every color choice carries echoes of the past, whispering stories about who we were and who we aspired to be. Take a moment to picture the vibrant silk robes of China's Tang dynasty, shimmering like liquid gold, reserved only for the imperial court. Or the stark black and white of Puritan attire in colonial America, designed to erase individuality in the name of piety. Fast forward to the ripped jeans and safety pins of punk rock in the 1970s, a middle finger to conformity, stitched together with anger and creativity. These aren't just fashion trends, they're cultural fingerprints, leaving indelible marks on the pages of history. Clothing has always been a mirror, reflecting the values, struggles, and dreams of every society it adorned. And sometimes it didn't just reflect change, it ignited it. So why does this matter now? Because the clothes we choose today are part of that same unbroken thread. Whether it's a corporate suit commanding authority or a streetwear hoodie challenging norms, what we wear still speaks volumes before we even utter a word. Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover how a simple piece of fabric could topple empires, redefine gender roles, and even save lives. From the forbidden dyes of ancient royalty to the sustainable fabrics shaping our future, this is the untold story of how humanity's wardrobe became its most powerful language. So settle in, you're about to see fashion in a way you never have before, not as a fleeting trend, but as the very fabric of civilization itself. Ancient Mesopotamia may have been the first to turn fabric into a social contract. Picture the ziggurats towering over bustling cities, where every pleat in a Sumerian noble's cornic skirt screamed status. The heavier the wool, the higher the rank. Meanwhile, laborers wore simple woven reeds, their clothing as unadorned as their place in society. But it was Egypt that elevated dress to sacred art. A pharaoh's sheer linen wasn't just cool against the desert heat. It glowed like moonlight, setting rulers apart as living gods. Even their sandals told a story, enemies painted beneath the soles so royalty could tread on foes with every step. Then there's the tale of purple, a color so potent it sparked wars. In Phoenicia, harvesting thousands of sea snails yielded just a drop of that vivid dye, making purple robes worth more than their weight in gold. When Roman emperors later claimed it as their exclusive right, wearing it unauthorized became treason proof that fabric could be fatal. But perhaps no ancient culture wove symbolism into cloth as intricately as China's Han Dynasty, where jade pendants and dragon-embroidered silks didn't just decorate the body, they mapped the cosmos. A single robe's patterns could denote celestial harmony, with every thread aligning wearers to the heavens. These weren't just fashion choices, they were visual laws, stitching people into their proper places. A Mesopotamian priestess's tiered fringe marked her as heaven's ambassador, while a Chinese farmer's hemp tunic silently confirmed his earthly role. Even accessories spoke volumes. The width of an Egyptian collar or the gleam of a Minoan gold belt became unspoken resumes. What's startling is how these ancient systems still echo today. That corporate ladder you're climbing, it's the modern ziggurat, that luxury handbag obsession. Just Phoenician purple rebranded. The more we peel back history's layers, the clearer it becomes clothing was humanity's first social media, broadcasting power, piety, and place long before hashtags existed. In ancient Greece, the democratic ideals of the city-states were woven right into their clothing. The chiton, a simple rectangular garment pinned at the shoulders and belted at the waist, was the great equalizer worn by philosophers, soldiers, and merchants alike. Its flowing drape symbolized the free movement of thought and body, mirroring the Athenian belief in civic participation. Even the wealthy couldn't escape its simplicity, though they might edge their tunics with delicate embroidery or dye them with expensive saffron. But here's the twist: that very uniformity became its own kind of power move. When every citizen dressed alike, it wasn't just about equality. It was a visual rebuke to the ostentatious monarchies across the Aegean. Rome took the opposite approach, turning fabric into a meticulously coded hierarchy. The toga wasn't just clothing, it was citizenship in textile form. Foreigners, slaves, even freedmen, none could legally wear it. And within that privileged circle, the folds told a story. The stark white toga candida of political candidates literally meant brightened, bleached to spotless perfection to project moral purity. Senators wore the toga praetexta with its purple stripe, while victorious generals paraded in the toga picta, a tapestry of gold and crimson that transformed the wearer into a walking monument. Then came the ultimate flex, the imperial purple cloak, a direct steal from the Phoenicians but with added menace. When Julius Caesar adopted it, the Senate gasped. When later emperors demanded it as exclusive regalia, wearing purple without permission became punishable by death. But the real genius of Roman fashion was its mobility. As legions marched across Europe, they didn't just conquer lands, they recruited local elites into the system through clothing. A Gallic chieftain given the right to wear a toga wasn't just getting new robes, he was being handed a Roman identity. Meanwhile, practical innovations like the military sagum, cloak short, woolen, and clasped at the shoulder, spread faster than Latin, becoming the ancient world's first standardized uniform. What makes this era so fascinating is how these two approaches collided. Greek dress whispered, "We are all citizens." Roman attire declared, "Here is exactly where you stand." Both systems would echo through history, whether in the powdered wigs of Enlightenment revolutionaries channeling Greek ideals or the military medals of Napoleonic Europe, mirroring Rome's obsession with ranked splendor. Even today, think of courtroom robes or academic regalia. We're still draping ourselves in the legacy of these ancient tailors of power. As the Roman Empire crumbled, however, a new force would rise to reshape fashion's role in society, one where piety replaced purple as the ultimate status symbol. The medieval world was coming, and with it, a wardrobe designed not for senatorial debates or Olympic Games, but for the glory of God and the rigid order of feudalism. Medieval Europe turned clothing into a legal battleground where fabric could land you in prison, or worse. Picture a world where the thickness of your fur trim or the color of your hose wasn't just about style but survival. Sumptuary laws sprawled across the continent like invisible fences, dictating everything from sleeve width to shoe pointiness. A merchant's wife caught wearing silk reserved for duchesses could face fines exceeding her husband's annual earnings. In Venice, prostitutes were forced to wear yellow scarves, while in England, convicted criminals donned striped hoods, a visual scarlet letter woven into wool. The church weaponized vestments with theatrical precision. A bishop's chasuble wasn't merely ornate. Its gold threads were divine Wi-Fi signals, connecting earthly authority to heavenly mandate. When Pope Innocent III decreed that priests must wear distinctive cassocks, It wasn't about modesty, it was a branding campaign, making clergy instantly recognizable in every muddy village. Meanwhile, knights transformed their surcoats into walking billboards. Heraldic symbols splashed across their chests turned jousting tournaments into live-action family trees, where a single mispainted lion could spark dynastic feuds. But beneath this sartorial straitjacket, rebellion simmered. The Black Death's aftermath created a startling paradox. As populations dwindled, surviving laborers gained bargaining power, and with it the audacity to dress above their station. Authorities raged against peasants wearing excessive, dagged sleeves or pointy poulain shoes, but the genie was out of the bottle. In Florence, wealthy bankers commissioned portraits in shockingly vibrant houppelans, their voluminous sleeves flouting laws meant to reserve such luxury for nobility. The real turning point came when fabric met the printing press. As Renaissance ideas spread, a German preacher's wife might pair her traditional wimple with an Italian-style brocade, silently stitching together old and new worlds. What began as whispered defiance, a fur trim here, a forbidden ribbon there, would unravel the medieval order thread by thread. Because when people start dressing like who they aspire to be, rather than who they're told to be, revolutions aren't far behind. And just over the horizon, a new force was rising that would make personal fashion statements explosive political acts: the Protestant Reformation. The Renaissance didn't just revive classical art, it turned every aristocrat into a walking masterpiece. In Florence, a single bolt of Venetian velvet could cost as much as a modest villa, its rich pile embroidered with gold thread to catch the candlelight during midnight salons. These weren't garments, they were wearable banks flaunting fortunes with every rustle. Elizabeth I of England took this to dazzling extremes. Her coronation gown, stiff with pearls and silver thread, wasn't just regalia, it was geopolitical theater. When foreign ambassadors gaped at her 1,500 pearl-encrusted sleeves, they weren't admiring fashion. They were witnessing England's naval dominance materialized in cloth. Even her iconic ruff, a frothy halo of Flemish lace, served as a calculated prop. The wider it spread, the more it forced courtiers to keep their distance, transforming fabric into a force field of majesty. But the real revolution happened in men's wardrobes. The humanist obsession with perfect proportions exploded in padded doublets that sculpted shoulders like marble, while codpieces, once practical armor, ballooned into absurd declarations of virility. A nobleman's silhouette became a living Vitruvian man, all geometric precision and swagger. In Venice, dandies dyed their beards to match their silk damask robes, while their wives tottered on chopines, platform shoes so towering they required servants for support. This wasn't vanity, it was performance art where every stitch declared, "I am the center of my own universe." Yet beneath the opulence, fashion became a stealthy weapon of social climbing. When a wealthy merchant's daughter smuggled forbidden Spanish farthingales into her trousseau, she wasn't just following trends, she was buying her family's ticket into the gentry. Tailors became alchemists, transforming wool into social mobility, one clandestine trim at a time. The Medici Bank even kept ledgers tracking which families overspent on wardrobe, using fashion as a credit score for political alliances. What made Renaissance style so explosive was its duality. For kings, it projected invincibility. For artists, it celebrated the human form. For upstarts, it was a golden ladder. When Shakespeare's audiences gasped at Hamlet's Inkai cloak, they understood clothes didn't just reflect identity, they created it. And as explorers returned from the New World with cochineal dyes and exotic feathers, fashion's palette expanded alongside humanity's horizons. The stage was set for a future where what you wore could spark riots, topple regimes, or birth entirely new industries. After all, if a ruff could hold up a queen's reputation, what else might fabric be capable of? The 18th century was a powder keg wrapped in silk, literally, while Versailles glittered with courtiers in brocade so stiff it could stand on its own. The streets of Paris simmered with citizens who could spot hypocrisy in every embroidered fleur-de-lis. Marie Antoinette's infamous pouf hairstyles, towering scaffolds of hair powdered white and studded with miniature ships or gardens, weren't just whimsy. They were the ancient regime's final, feverish scream of excess. Her 3-foot-wide panniers, those basket-like structures beneath skirts that made doorways impassable, became walking metaphors for a nobility utterly detached from reality. Yet for all its absurdity, Rococo fashion held a mirror to the era's contradictions. Those delicate silk shoes, often worn just once before being discarded, while peasants wrapped their feet in rags. But fabric was already becoming the battlefield. The term sans culottes, literally without breeches, wasn't just a dig at workers' simple trousers. It was a class war waged in wardrobe choices. Aristocrats clung to knee breeches and silk stockings as badges of privilege, while revolutionaries adopted the practical pantalon as a sartorial middle finger to the elite. Women, meanwhile, staged quiet rebellions of their own. The riding habit, a tailored jacket and long skirt modeled on menswear, gave noblewomen unprecedented freedom to move, hunt, and even debate politics without tripping over layers of taffeta. It was a sartorial loophole, allowing them to inch toward equality while technically staying proper. Across the Atlantic, clothing became a weapon in the fight for independence. When American colonists boycotted British textiles, spinning bees turned into political theater. Homespun dresses, once marks of poverty, were suddenly worn with pride by wealthy women as symbols of resistance. Benjamin Franklin famously wore a plain brown suit to the French court, rejecting brocade to embody Republican simplicity, a sartorial act so radical it shocked Versailles more than any treaty. Even accessories carried coded messages. The tricolor cockade pinned to a lapel or the Phrygian cap worn by radicals weren't just fashion. They were membership cards for revolution. What makes this period so fascinating is how fashion's excesses hastened its own downfall. The very wigs and ruffles meant to display power became visual evidence of its corruption. By the time the guillotine blades fell, the message was clear. In societies stretched to breaking point, clothing stops being just fabric and becomes forensic evidence of who's to blame. And as the 19th century dawned, a new question emerged. If clothes helped topple kings, what else might they reshape? The answer would come in the whir of sewing machines and the rustle of crinolines, as fashion democratized faster than anyone could have predicted. The whir of sewing machines didn't just stitch fabric, it shredded centuries of tradition. When Elias Howe patented the first practical sewing machine in 1846, he unwittingly launched a sartorial earthquake. Suddenly, a dress that once took a seamstress 14 hours could be whipped up in just one. But this speed came with hidden seams. Factories churned out crinolines by the thousands, those steel-caged skirts that turned women into walking bells, yet the hands assembling them often belonged to children working 12-hour shifts. The same industrial boom that made lace affordable for shop clerks also trapped 8-year-olds in Lancashire cotton mills, their tiny fingers snagging on threads while their lungs filled with lint. Fashion's democratization had a dark twin, uniformity. Gone were the days when a skilled tailor would measure your posture and adjust for your gait. Now, garments came in standardized sizes: small, medium, large, as if human bodies were interchangeable cogs. The stiff detachable collar, once a mark of gentility, became the white noose of the office clerk, its starchiness mirroring the rigid hierarchies of corporate life. You could spot a man's place in the industrial order at a glance. The artisan's leather apron, the factory foreman's wool waistcoat, the banker's sleek top hat, each a badge of caste in the new machine age. Yet even as clothing became mass-produced, it grew more symbolic than ever. The flat cap of a Manchester textile worker wasn't just headgear, it was a silent protest against the silk top hats gliding past his factory. When British women adopted bloomers, those scandalous bifurcated garments inspired by Turkish trousers, they weren't just chasing comfort, they were strapping on freedom, one rebellious stitch at a time. Even mourning dress became a battleground. Queen Victoria's perpetual black crepe after Prince Albert's death spawned an entire industry of jet beads and mourning warehouses, turning grief into a performative consumer ritual. What made this era so transformative wasn't just the clothes themselves, but the systems they birthed. Department stores rose as cathedrals of consumption, their plate glass windows turning pedestrians into worshippers of the new retail religion. Mail-order catalogs brought Parisian styles to prairie homesteads, collapsing geography with every illustrated page. And lurking beneath it all was cotton America's white gold, harvested by enslaved hands, spun in English mills, and sold back to colonial markets in a brutal triangle of profit. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how we dress, it redefined clothing as both a commodity and a weapon, stitching together global trade networks with threads of exploitation and aspiration. As the 19th century waned, a counter-current emerged. The arts and crafts movement, led by reformers like William Morris, rejected factory-made frippery in favor of hand-embroidered fabrics that honored the worker's touch. It was a romantic rebellion doomed by its own elitism. Who but the wealthy had time for hand-blocked wallpaper patterns? But it planted a crucial idea. If clothing could be mass-produced, perhaps it could also be reclaimed. That tension between convenience and conscience would echo through the next century, from the sweatshop protests of New York's garment district to today's sustainable fashion movement. Because once humanity had tasted the speed of the sewing machine, there was no going back, only forward, into a future where every stitch carried the weight of progress and its price. Queen Victoria's grief didn't just color her wardrobe, it dyed an entire era. When Prince Albert died in 1861, the Queen's decision to wear mourning black for the next 4 decades transformed personal sorrow into a national dress code. But this wasn't just about one widow's heartbreak, it was a masterclass in how clothing could weaponize emotion. The rules were excruciatingly precise. Widows wore matte black crepe for a full year and a day, with veils so dense they blurred the world into a perpetual twilight. After this deep mourning period, they could graduate to slightly less oppressive, half-mourning shades like gray or lavender. But woe betide any woman caught wearing crimson too soon. Men had it easier, their grief neatly contained to black armbands and hatbands, as if sorrow could be rationed by gender. Yet behind this performative mourning lay a brutal economy of suffering. The demand for jet, a fossilized coal that could be polished into gleaming black beads, turned the English seaside town of Whitby into a boomtown overnight. Miners clawed the brittle stone from cliffs, while artisans carved it into brooches shaped like broken columns or weeping willows. A single necklace might represent months of a family's income, making grief literally unaffordable for the poor. Middle-class women desperate to keep up appearances resorted to mourning warehouses, where they could rent entire black wardrobes by the week. The message was clear: even in death, your social standing dictated how elegantly you could ache. But where there's repression, there's always resistance. Spiritualists, mostly women, began wearing white mourning dresses to seances, claiming the color helped them commune with the dead. It was a brilliant subversion. By rejecting the somber palette, they turned grief into something luminous and rebellious. Meanwhile, the aesthetic movement openly mocked Victorian excess, with figures like Oscar Wilde quipping that one must have a heart of stone to read the death of Little Nell without laughing. Their flowing, artful garments in soft greens and peacock blues were silent protests against the industrial blackness swallowing the era. The most heartbreaking rebellion, though, came from children. Photographs from the period show small boys awkwardly posed in miniature mourning suits, their stiff collars scratching their necks, while girls clutched dolls dressed in matching black. These images reveal the unspoken truth. Victorian mourning wasn't just about honoring the dead, it was about training the living in the art of emotional performance. By the time the 20th century dawned, the rigid rituals were already unraveling. The Great War's staggering death toll made prolonged mourning impractical, and the flappers of the 1920s would dance on the grave of crepe and jet. But the legacy remains. Today's celebration of life ceremonies and the trend of wearing bright colors to funerals aren't just modern choices, they're direct rejections of a system that once tried to standardize sorrow stitch by stitch. What makes Victorian mourning attire so hauntingly modern is its familiarity. We may no longer wear veils for years, but social media has become our new mourning crepe, a space where grief is curated, filtered, and sometimes performative. The pressure to mourn correctly, to ache beautifully, still lingers. The difference is that now, instead of black jet beads, we measure our sorrow in carefully crafted posts and memorial hashtags. The fabrics change, but the human need to clothe our grief, whether in bombazine or Instagram stories, remains eternal. The 20th century didn't just change fashion, it shattered it. Picture this: in 1913, women were still laced into corsets so tight they cracked ribs, their bodies bent into the hourglass shape society demanded. Then came the suffragettes, marching in blinding white dresses, not just for visibility, but as a calculated rebranding of femininity. These weren't passive victims in frilly gowns. They were warriors in spotless uniforms, their attire telegraphing purity of purpose to skeptical crowds. When police dragged them away, the white fabric became a canvas for mud and bloodstains, turning each arrest into a viral image before social media existed. Meanwhile, in Paris, a young Coco Chanel was quietly staging her own rebellion with something revolutionary: comfort. Her jersey knits, originally fabric for men's underwear, draped like a second skin, freeing women to actually breathe and move. Critics sneered that her designs looked like poor people's clothes, but that was the point. Chanel wasn't just selling dresses, she was selling autonomy. A woman in a Chanel suit could stride into a room without hoops or bustles announcing her arrival. Her ideas would do that instead. Then World War I turned practicality into patriotism overnight. With men at the front, women took over factories, their corsets literally impeding the war effort. Nurses needed to run, machinists required arm mobility, and suddenly, skirts climbed an unthinkable 6 inches off the ground. The wartime munitionette in her tunic and trousers wasn't just dressed for labor, she was the blueprint for a new century. By the roaring 20s, the flapper emerged as a Molotov cocktail of silk and fringe. Her dropped waist dresses mocked the corset's tyranny, while scandalously bare knees flashed under beaded hemlines. This wasn't mere style evolution, it was a sartorial mutiny. Jazz-age women smoked in public, drove cars, and danced the Charleston with a violence that sent petticoats flying. Each swing of their fringed skirts was a middle finger to Victorian restraint, proving that fabric could be as disruptive as any protest sign. What made this era extraordinary wasn't just the clothes themselves, but their velocity. For millennia, fashion had trailed behind social change. Now it was sprinting ahead, tearing down barriers in its wake. When Chanel popularized the little black dress in 1926, she didn't just create a wardrobe staple. she weaponized simplicity against centuries of oppressive ornamentation. The message was clear: women's clothing would no longer be a cage but a catalyst, and as hemlines rose, so did expectations, proving that sometimes liberation begins with a single snip of the scissors. When the stock market crashed in 1929, plunging America into the Great Depression, something remarkable happened in darkened movie theaters across the country. As breadlines stretched around city blocks and families huddled in tar paper shacks, audiences escaped into a world where every woman was a shimmering siren and every man a dashing leading man. Hollywood didn't just sell tickets, it sold transformation. A factory worker in Cleveland could spend 10 cents to watch Marlene Dietrich slink across the screen in a bias-cut satin gown, her shoulders dusted with faux fox fur, and for 90 glorious minutes become someone who'd never known hunger. The genius of Golden Age costuming lay in its alchemy, turning cheap materials into dreams. Studio seamstresses worked miracles with rayon instead of silk, glass beads in place of diamonds, creating illusions so convincing they fooled even the cameras. Joan Crawford's iconic Letty Linton dress, with its gargantuan ruffled sleeves, was actually made from inexpensive cotton organdie, yet it sparked a nationwide craze. Department stores sold knockoffs by the thousands to secretaries and shopgirls who'd never afford Paris couture, but could own a piece of the fantasy for a week's wages. Men weren't immune to this sartorial sorcery. As unemployment soared, the sharp-shouldered suits of Cary Grant and Clark Gable became blueprints for maintaining dignity. A second-hand suit meticulously pressed, a hat brim snapped just so. These weren't just clothes, they were armor against despair. The zoot suit riots of the 1940s would later prove how volatile men's fashion could become when mixed with racial tensions and economic anxiety. But in the darkest years of the Depression, Hollywood's leading men offered a different lesson. Poverty could touch your wallet, but it didn't have to define your demeanor. What's fascinating is how these silver screen styles trickled into everyday life in unexpected ways. Housewives bleached flour sacks to sew dresses for their daughters, copying the puffed sleeves and smocking details from Shirley Temple's costumes. Teen girls clipped magazine patterns to recreate Jean Harlow's slinky evening looks in repurposed curtains. The message was clear: glamour wasn't about wealth, it was about imagination. Even the Hays Code, which censored film content, inadvertently boosted fashion's power by forcing designers to imply sexuality through clever draping rather than revealing cuts, making the clothes themselves more tantalizing. This era birthed the original influencer culture. When Carole Lombard wore trousers on screen, sales of women's slacks spiked nationwide. A single close-up of Greta Garbo's cloche hat could empty millinery shops by noon. But beneath the glitter, a profound truth emerged. In times of crisis, people don't just want clothing to cover their bodies. They need it to reconstruct their identities. The sequins and shoulder pads of 1930s cinema weren't frivolous. They were lifelines, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act is refusing to let hardship dictate how you present yourself to the world. As World War II loomed, this lesson would take on new urgency. Rationing would replace rayon with parachute silk, and victory rolls would stand in for jeweled hair combs. But the Depression-era lesson stuck. Fashion isn't just about what you wear, it's about who you insist on being, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. And when the war ended, a new generation would take that idea and run with it, turning clothing into a language of rebellion that would echo through the decades to come. World War II turned wardrobes into battlefields where every stitch carried strategic weight. When rationing hit Britain in 1941, the government didn't just limit food, it standardized clothing with the CC-41 utility scheme. These weren't just dresses, they were sartorial blueprints for survival. Seam allowances shrank to save fabric, buttons were limited to 3 per cuff, and pleats vanished overnight. But the real revolution hid in plain sight: pockets. For the first time, women's utility dresses came with deep, practical pockets designed to hold tools for factory work or volunteer fire brigades. A simple fold of fabric became feminist infrastructure, acknowledging that women weren't just keeping the home fires burning, they were building tanks and putting out literal blazes. Across the Channel, fashion became clandestine warfare. A Parisian woman's tilted beret might seem like a careless flourish, but to the resistance, it signaled safe house locations. Knotted scarves transmitted messages: 3 knots for a Gestapo checkpoint ahead, 2 for a compromised meeting point. Even children's clothing played its part, with embroidered flowers on pinafores hiding escape routes in their stitched pathways. The most brilliant subterfuge came from couturiers like Lucien Lelong, who kept Parisian fashion houses open under Nazi occupation, not out of collaboration, but as cover. His ateliers became hubs for smuggling Jewish tailors to safety, their escape routes woven through fabric deliveries. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, clothing became an instrument of cultural erasure. When American occupation forces demanded Japanese men abandon kimonos for Western suits, it wasn't just about modernization, it was psychological disarmament. Traditional garments were folded away like samurai swords, their surrender as symbolic as any treaty signing. Women's mont trousers, originally farm wear, became patriotic uniforms for factory work, their baggy lines a stark departure from the delicate silks of peacetime. Yet even here, resistance simmered. Some women stashed by sashes beneath their work aprons, preserving centuries of artistry in hidden folds. The war's aftermath revealed fashion's strange duality. In London, women who'd worn trousers for years refused to return to pre-war skirts, permanently rewriting workplace dress codes. In America, nylon stockings became such potent symbols of normalcy that their post-war return sparked near riots in department stores. And from the ashes of Hiroshima rose perhaps the most unexpected sartorial phoenix: the Japanese youth who repurposed military parachutes into billowy dresses, transforming instruments of war into statements of hope. What makes wartime fashion so extraordinary isn't just its ingenuity under constraints, but its legacy. Those utility dress patterns evolved into today's minimalist aesthetics, while hidden pocket designs resurfaced in modern techwear. The tilted beret lives on as a fashion staple, its resistance roots mostly forgotten. Most powerfully, the war proved clothing's capacity to hold multitudes. It could enforce conformity and spark rebellion, signal surrender and whisper defiance, all in the same hemline. When we slip on a trench coat or cuff our jeans today, we're wearing the echoes of decisions made in bomb shelters and ration queues, where what you wore wasn't about style but survival. The 1950s presented a paradox wrapped in poodle skirts and starched white collars. On the surface, post-war America dressed like a harmony of conformity, men marching to office jobs in identical gray flannel suits, women vacuuming suburban homes in shirtwaist dresses that cinched their waists back to pre-war ideals. Department stores sold pre-packaged identities: the businessman's fedora, the housewife's apron, the child's saddle shoes. Even fabric technology reinforced the status quo, with new synthetic blends like Dacron polyester promising wrinkle-free perfection, as if life itself could be pressed into seamless submission. But look closer and you'll spot the fraying threads. Teenagers, a demographic newly empowered by post-war economic booms and the rise of disposable income, began rewriting the rules. James Dean's red jacket in Rebel Without a Cause wasn't just costuming, it was a flare gun shot across the bow of adult authority. Blue jeans, once strictly workwear for laborers, became the uniform of adolescent defiance, their faded knees and rolled cuffs telegraphing a rejection of polished propriety. Manufacturers panicked when schools banned denim, fearing it would corrupt morale, proving just how potent a pair of pants could be. Music injected even more chaos into the sartorial order. Elvis Presley's pink shirts and Brylcreem's slicked hair weren't merely flamboyant, they blurred rigid gender lines, making parents clutch their pearls. When he gyrated on the Ed Sullivan Show, it wasn't just his hips causing outrage, it was the way his clothes moved. Unlike the stiff suits of crooners like Perry Como, Elvis's outfits clung and shimmered, turning his body into a manifesto of unrestrained energy. Black musicians like Little Richard and Chuck Berry amplified this rebellion. Their zoot suit-inspired stage were reclaiming flamboyance as power in an era still wrestling with segregation. The decade's most fascinating sartorial battleground, suburbia's own backyards, while women were sold the myth of domestic bliss through Leave It to Beaver-style shirtwaists, many were quietly subverting the script. The rise of capri pants for casual wear gave them mobility previously reserved for men. Pucci's colorful prints, though initially marketed as resort wear, sneaked psychedelic energy into conservative subdivisions. Even the iconic circle skirt held secrets. Its voluminous layers required crinolines that rustled audibly with every step, a whisper of rebellion beneath the cheerful facade. What made this era so pivotal was its duality. For every corporate clone in a Brooks Brothers suit, there was a beat poet in a turtleneck murmuring dissent in coffeehouses. The 1950s didn't just set the stage for the 60s radical shifts, it proved that clothing could be both camouflage and provocation, often simultaneously. When a teenage girl sewed a poodle onto her skirt, she wasn't just following a trend. She was stitching together two competing impulses, the desire to belong and the need to declare that even conformity could be personalized. The tension between those impulses would explode in the decades to come, but it was here, in the age of sock hops and soda fountains, that modern fashion's central question first took shape. Are clothes armor against change, or the battering ram that breaks it open? The 1960s didn't just change fashion, it set the entire industry on fire and danced around the flames. While their parents clung to starched shirts and crinoline skirts, a generation of young people reached for tie-dye, not because it was pretty, but because each splatter of color was a middle finger to assembly line perfection. This wasn't just about style, it was sabotage. When hippies dipped cotton into vats of homemade dye, they weren't crafting outfits, they were rejecting the very idea of mass-produced conformity. Those psychedelic swirls declared, "No two of us are alike, and we refuse to be sold the same dream." But the revolution wasn't just colorful, it was calculated. Mary Quant's miniskirt didn't just show leg, it hacked away at decades of patriarchal control with every inch of exposed thigh. Critics called it indecent, but that was the point. A woman in a miniskirt wasn't dressing for male approval. She was reclaiming her body as her own territory. Meanwhile, black activists wrapped themselves in dashikis, turning African textiles into armor against assimilation. Every geometric pattern was a reclaimed heritage, every bold hue a defiance of respectability politics that demanded they shrink themselves. Even military surplus became a weapon of dissent. Kids who'd grown up watching Vietnam on the nightly news turned army jackets inside out, stitching peace signs over bullet holes. A single repurposed epaulette became a lecture on imperialism. Camouflage worn ironically in Central Park screamed louder than any protest sign. The genius of 60s fashion lay in its alchemy, taking symbols of oppression and transmuting them into liberation. Music festivals became the ultimate protest runways. At Woodstock, Janis Joplin's fringe jacket swayed with every raw note, embodying the era's untamed spirit. Jimi Hendrix's military jacket, slashed with American flag embroidery, turned patriotism into a question rather than a pledge. And when the Doors' Jim Morrison wore leather pants with no underwear, it wasn't just provocation, it was a rejection of the sanitized, suburban sexuality of the 50s. What made this decade so explosive was its refusal to compartmentalize. Clothing wasn't separate from politics or music or civil rights, it was the connective tissue. A single safety pin could hold together a jacket and a worldview. By the time the 70s dawned, the establishment had co-opted bell-bottoms and peasant blouses, but the message lingered. Fashion could be a Molotov cocktail or a manifesto, depending on how you wore it. The counterculture proved that what you put on your body could change minds, challenge power, and rewrite the rules not just of style, but of society itself. The safety pin's journey from diaper fastener to anarchist emblem began in a tiny London shop called SEX, where Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren stitched rebellion into every seam. This wasn't just a boutique, it was a war room where punk's anti-fashion manifesto took shape. Ripped fishnets weren't accidents, they were meticulously distressed to expose the frayed edges of British society. A shirt held together with safety pins didn't scream poverty, it screamed refusal. Why sew things properly when the system itself was falling apart at the seams? The genius of punk style was its brutal honesty. While luxury brands fetishized perfection, Westwood's design celebrated disintegration. Bondage trousers with dangling straps mocked high-fashion sleek lines, turning wearers into walking critiques of consumerism. The Sex Pistols' anarchic tartan wasn't just fabric, it was cultural vandalism, slicing up Scotland's proudest symbol and reassembling it into something dangerous. When Johnny Rotten snarled, "God save the Queen," in a custom Westwood jacket plastered with swastikas and communist imagery, he wasn't making a coherent political statement. He was proving that clothing could be as disruptive as a brick through a storefront window. What made punk so terrifying to the establishment wasn't its filth, but its accessibility. Anyone could become a revolutionary with a pair of scissors and some safety pins from their grandmother's sewing kit. Unlike the hippies' labor-intensive tie-dye or the mod's expensive suits, punk required zero skill or money. A disaffected teenager in Coventry could destroy a school uniform with bleach and safety pins, transforming state-sanctioned conformity into a badge of dissent before homeroom. This democratization of rebellion was punk's real power, the realization that you didn't need couture training to weaponize your wardrobe. The movement's lasting impact lies in its contradictions. Those safety pins were both pragmatic, holding torn clothes together, and poetic, symbolizing a fractured society barely held in place. Mohawks required hours of meticulous styling to achieve their "I just don't care" aesthetic. Even the Sex Pistols' infamous destroyed T-shirts, sold at Westwood's shop, turned anti-consumerist rage into a commodity, a paradox that would haunt alternative fashion forever. Yet beneath the chaos was a profound truth. When people feel powerless, sometimes the most radical act is dressing like the end of the world. Punk's ghost still rattles through fashion today. Every intentionally distressed denim jacket, every runway collection borrowing anarchic motifs, owes a debt to those safety pin revolutionaries. But what's often forgotten is how deeply personal this rebellion was. Unlike the uniformed protests of previous decades, punk style was fiercely individual. No two ripped shirts were alike, just as no two angers were identical. In the end, punk wasn't about destroying fashion. It was about proving that clothing could be as complex, as contradictory, and as brutally honest as the people wearing it. And once that door was kicked open, there was no going back. The 1980s didn't just dress for success, they weaponized it. Shoulder pads sharp enough to cut glass weren't just a trend. They were architectural reinforcements for women storming corporate citadels. Picture a Wall Street trading floor in 1985. Men in pinstriped armor, women in skirt suits with lapels wide enough to land helicopters on, all of them clad in what essentially amounted to business casual battle gear. This wasn't fashion, it was psychological warfare stitched in wool and silk. Armani's unstructured suits became the uniform of the nouveau rich, their soft drape whispering, "I'm so powerful, I don't even need to try." Meanwhile, television's dynasty turned sequins into a moral stance. If you weren't dripping in rhinestones by breakfast, were you even playing the game? The message was clear. Wealth wasn't just about money anymore, it was a visual scoreboard. But here's the twist: while yuppies were busy turning boardrooms into runways, hip-hop artists were flipping the script entirely. Run DMC's Adidas tracksuits and gold chains thicker than bike locks didn't just mock Wall Street's dress code, they reclaimed luxury as a birthright, not a privilege. The real genius of 80s power dressing lay in its contradictions. Women adopted masculine tailoring not to mimic men, but to highlight how absurd the rules had always been. A single padded shoulder could say, "I'll play your game, but I'll rewrite the rules while I'm at it." Designers like Thierry Mugler took this to surreal extremes, crafting suits with waists so cinched and shoulders so broad they turned executives into superheroes. It was fashion as corporate cosplay, proving that clothes could shape reality before you even opened your mouth. Yet beneath the glitz, darker currents swirled. Those iconic red suspenders Michael Douglas wore in Wall Street, they weren't just accessories, they were nooses of ambition, tightening with every hostile takeover. And when Nancy Reagan championed her "just say no" dresses in prim pastels, she wasn't just setting trends, she was stitching morality into fabric, one pillbox hat at a time. What made this decade so explosive was its refusal to choose between rebellion and conformity. Power suits and punk leather coexisted in the same clubs, proving that fashion could be both a shield and a spear. By the time the 90s arrived, the shoulder pads would deflate, but the lesson remained. Clothing doesn't just reflect power, it redistributes it. Whether you were a broker in a three-piece suit or a b-boy in unlaced sneakers, what you wore wasn't just about looking good, it was about rewriting the rules of engagement, one stitch at a time. The 1990s arrived like a hangover after the 80s champagne binge, and fashion responded by rolling out of bed in whatever it could grab from the floor. Grunge wasn't just a music genre, it was a sartorial sigh of exhaustion, a rejection of the previous decade's power suits and spray-tanned glamour. Kurt Cobain's ratty cardigans, often purchased for pocket change at thrift stores, became the unofficial uniform of a generation that saw through the artifice. Those stretched-out sweaters weren't just about comfort, they were middle fingers to the idea that self-worth required a dry cleaning bill. When Cobain wore the same striped long-sleeve shirt for weeks, he wasn't being lazy, he was proving that authenticity didn't come with a label. But grunge's anti-fashion stance had an ironic twist. The very flannels and ripped jeans meant to reject consumerism were soon mass-produced by major brands and sold back to teenagers at mall prices. What started as a DIY ethos, literally cutting sleeves off old shirts and safety, pinning them back together, became a commodified aesthetic. Doc Martens, originally work boots for British postal workers and skinheads, stomped their way into mainstream consciousness, equally at home on the feet of Seattle musicians and London ravers. The boot's chunky soles and yellow stitching became symbols of resilience, whether navigating mosh pits or protest marches. Then came Kate Moss and the heroin chic phenomenon, where fashion took grunge's disheveled vibe and polished it into something dangerously aspirational. Calvin Klein's minimalist ads, featuring Moss in barely their slip dresses and dark circles under her eyes, sparked outrage for glamorizing frailty. Critics accused the industry of romanticizing self-destruction, but the trend revealed a deeper truth. In a post-Reagan, post-Berlin Wall world, perfection felt not just unrealistic but dishonest. The messy hair, the smudged eyeliner, the oversized everything, these weren't just style choices, they were battle scars from a generation raised on recession and disillusionment. Women in the Riot Jarrell movement weaponized this aesthetic even further. Bands like Bikini Kill paired babydoll dresses with combat boots, a visual manifesto that screamed, "We can be feminine and furious." Their handmade zines and screen-printed t-shirts reclaimed punk's DIY spirit, turning clothing into protest art. A single band tee wasn't just merch, it was a membership card to a revolution that valued raw emotion over airbrushed ideals. What made 90s fashion so revolutionary wasn't just its rejection of excess, but its embrace of contradictions. Grunge could be both apathetic and deeply political, mainstream and underground, ugly and beautiful sometimes within the same outfit. As globalization accelerated, clothing became a universal dialect. A teenager in Tokyo might pair a vintage Nirvana shirt with Harajuku leggings, while a skater in Los Angeles layered flannel over Dickies. The message was clear: identity wasn't monolithic anymore. You could stitch yourself together from scraps of subcultures, and in doing so, create something entirely new. By the decade's end, the internet would amplify these collisions, but the groundwork was laid in those thrift store dressing rooms and muddy festival fields. The 90s proved that sometimes the most radical statement isn't what you add to your wardrobe, it's what you refuse to wear, and in that refusal, an entire generation found its voice. The early 2000s didn't just change our closets, they rewired our brains to crave newness at an unsustainable pace. Zara's lightning-fast production cycles turned runway looks into mall staples before the original designers could even ship their collections, creating a hunger for instant gratification that fashion had never seen. Where consumers once saved for months to buy a single well-made coat, now they could snag 5 trendy pieces for the same price, each garment worn a handful of times before being discarded like yesterday's news. The dark genius of fast fashion wasn't just its affordability, it was how perfectly it mirrored the internet's emerging culture of disposability, where everything from music to relationships felt temporary. Juicy Couture's Vela tracksuits became the uniform of this new era, their bedazzled, juicy backside announcing that loungewear had officially gone public. What started as a cozy alternative to denim quickly morphed into a social statement. These weren't just pants, they were billboards. Celebrities like Britney Spears and Jennifer Lopez turned grocery runs into paparazzi moments while draped in pastel Vela, blurring the line between private comfort and public performance. The tracksuit's rise coincided with reality TV's explosion, creating a world where everyone, not just stars, could curate their image 24/7. Paris Hilton took this performative dressing to its logical extreme, her tiny sunglasses and trucker hats serving as proto-influencer merch before Instagram existed. Each outfit was a calculated character piece, the heiress as walking brand, her life as content. But beneath the glittery surface, the human cost of this disposable style began piling up like unsold inventory. Reports surfaced of Bangladeshi factory workers sewing 70-hour weeks for wages that wouldn't cover a single Juicy Couture headband. The same synthetic fabrics that made clothes cheap and colorful were shedding microplastics into oceans with every wash. Environmentalists sounded alarms about mountains of discarded garments choking landfills in Chile and Ghana, but the industry's machine was too profitable to slow down. Even as documentaries exposed the horrors of sweatshops, consumers found themselves trapped in a cycle of guilt and gratification, knowing the harm, yet still reaching for that dopamine hit of a new purchase. What made this era so transformative was its paradox. The same internet that exposed fast fashion's abuses also accelerated its reach, with haul videos and outfit of the day posts turning shopping into spectator sport. When a teenage girl filmed herself unzipping a bulging bag of $30 Shane dresses for her YouTube channel, she wasn't just sharing a hobby, she was participating in a global experiment in overconsumption. The early 2000s taught us to treat clothing like content, scroll, like, discard, repeat. And as the decade closed, two competing forces were rising: the sustainable fashion movement whispering about slow consumption, and social media giants preparing to launch us into an even faster cycle of trend turnover. The reckoning was coming, but first, we'd have to admit we were addicted. Social media didn't just speed up fashion, it shattered the entire concept of seasonal trends into a million fragments, each with its own 15-second lifespan. TikTok's algorithm treats style like a slot machine, where a single viral dance can catapult a forgotten 90s crop top from thrift store obscurity to sold-out status in 48 hours. This isn't just fast fashion, it's instant fashion, where microtrends bloom and wither faster than it takes to ship a Shane order. A Gen Z teen might wear balletcore one week, indie sleaze the next, and workwear-inspired Carhartt by Friday, not because they're fickle, but because their feed rewards constant reinvention. The irony: while brands scramble to keep up, these same young shoppers are haunting vintage stores, hunting for Levi's 500 ones from the 1990s or Y2K era Von Dutch hats, proof that the most rebellious act in an age of disposable style is choosing clothes that already survived one life cycle. Instagram turned everyone's wardrobe into a meticulously curated museum exhibit. A brunch outfit isn't just pancakes and jeans anymore, it's a grid opportunity, each color coordinated bite staged for maximum aesthetic payoff. Influencers became walking mood boards, their Capelli Sun hats and Reformation dresses serving as clickable shopping portals. But the real power shift happened when marginalized communities reclaimed the narrative. Black creators tagged #support Black designers to bypass gatekeepers, while plus-size advocates like Lizzo turned sheer bodysuits into viral statements about body autonomy. Even the humble hoodie, once weaponized as racial profiling shorthand, became a canvas for protest during Black Lives Matter marches, its pockets stuffed with protest plans and its silhouette broadcast live from every smartphone. What makes this era unprecedented is its duality. Fashion has never been more democratic. A 15-year-old with a thrifted blazer and a TikTok account can out-influence a magazine editor, yet never more fragmented. The same app that fuels microtrends also hosts #slow fashion hashtags, where users proudly stitch their own clothes or document decade-old sweater repairs. Streetwear drops sell out in nanoseconds, while Depop resellers profit off the nostalgia for clothes that haven't even hit vintage status yet. We're living in fashion's first truly decentralized age, where a meme can birth a trend, a protest can redefine a garment's meaning, and your greatest style influence might be someone you've never met, live streaming from a bedroom in Jakarta. The runway isn't in Paris anymore, it's wherever you open your phone. The fashion industry's latest revolution isn't happening on runways, it's unfolding in rainforest clearings, desert weaving circles, and high-tech labs where scientists are rediscovering what the Maya and Moguls knew centuries ago. In the highlands of Peru, Quechua women still spin alpaca wool using techniques unchanged since the Inca Empire. Their natural dyes brewed from cochineal insects that yield crimson so vibrant they put synthetic pigments to shame. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, designers are studying Edo period sashiko stitching, turning fabric scraps into intricate patchworks that outlast mass-produced fast fashion by decades. This isn't just sustainability, it's time-tested genius hiding in plain sight. Patagonia's Worn Wear program, where customers trade in battered jackets for repairs instead of replacements, mirrors the ethos of Navajo weavers who never discard a textile without salvaging its threads. Stella McCartney's mushroom-based Milo leather echoes ancient practices like Sami reindeer herders using every sinew and hide. Even the zero-waste pattern cutting now celebrated in Paris ateliers was perfected centuries ago by Chinese tailors crafting kipaos so precise they left no fabric scraps. The irony is palpable. After 2 centuries of industrialization convinced us newer meant better, we're realizing our ancestors' closets were greener than our organic cotton tote bags. But this revival isn't just about techniques, it's about rebuilding severed relationships. When Kenyan designer Asa Dione trains Senegalese farmers to grow organic cotton on drought-resistant roots, she's reconnecting a chain broken by colonial cotton plantations. The Maori concept of Kaishiakitanga, guardianship of the land, is inspiring New Zealand brands to trace every fiber back to its source, honoring the earth as a living partner rather than a resource to plunder. In Bolivia, grandmothers teaching Aymara girls to weave with llama wool aren't just passing down skills, they're stitching ecosystem knowledge into every knot, ensuring the next generation understands which plants dye wool indigo without poisoning rivers. The real shift lies in recognizing that sustainability was never a trend. It was the default for millennia. Before synthetic dyes turned rivers neon in 19th century Manchester, indigenous dyers from India to Nigeria calibrated their vats to lunar cycles, knowing certain colors only held fast under a waning moon. While modern brands tout innovative, biodegradable packaging, Japanese furoshiki wrapping cloths have been reducing waste since the 8th century. Even the much-hyped circular economy is just a reboot of the Great Plains buffalo culture, where nothing was wasted from hide to hoof. What makes this movement extraordinary is its refusal to romanticize the past while reclaiming its wisdom. Solar-powered factories now weave hemp fabric using algorithms modeled on Inca knot-writing systems. 3D printers layer biodegradable filaments inspired by spider silk, harvested without harming a single arachnid. The covenant is being rewritten, not to reject progress, but to realign it with the ancient truth that clothing should honor its makers, its wearers, and the ground it grew from. After centuries of fashion racing forward while glancing backward only for aesthetic inspiration, we're finally learning to let the past lead us into a more accountable future, one thread at a time. A Sikh man's turban isn't just cloth, it's a crown of sovereignty, a 500-year-old promise to honor the divine in every strand of unshorn hair. When Guru Gobind Singh mandated the dastar for his followers in 1699, he wasn't prescribing fashion, he was forging armor. Each precise fold defends against assimilation, turning everyday fabric into an unbreakable vow. Yet in Western airports, that same turban often triggers extra screenings, its sacred geometry misread as threat. The dissonance is jarring. What was designed as a beacon of spiritual discipline becomes, in hostile eyes, a mark of suspicion. Jewish tzitz tell a similarly profound story in miniature. These fringed garments, commanded in the Torah's Book of Numbers, transform ordinary shirts into tactile reminders of faith. The exacting number of knots and coils wound like DNA helixes encodes centuries of rabbinical wisdom. For Orthodox boys tying their first tzitzit at 13, the ritual isn't about tradition, it's about literally wrapping oneself in commandments. But when those same fringes flutter outside yeshiva walls, they sometimes draw stares or worse. In 1938 Berlin, Nazis forced Jews to unpick their T-zits in public humiliations. Today, subtle workplace dress codes still pressure some to tuck them discreetly out of sight. No garment embodies modern tension like the hijab. To Muslim women who choose it, the headscarf can be both intimate dialogue with God and bold feminist statement, a rejection of societies that reduce women to their bodies. Iranian protesters burning their hijabs and French students fighting to wear them are wrestling with the same question: who controls a woman's right to define her own devotion? The fabric itself is neutral. It's the politics draped over it that ignite fires. When a kindergarten teacher in Belgium loses her job for wearing hijab, or a politician in India calls for bans on burqas, they're not debating cloth, they're contesting whether public space has room for private faith. The cruelest irony lies in how these sacred textiles get politicized. A Sikh turban becomes a talking point in immigration debates. T-zits strings get dismissed as outdated orthodoxy. A hijab morphs into a lightning rod for xenophobia. Yet in their original contexts, these garments were meant to transcend politics, to stitch the sacred into the mundane act of getting dressed each morning. The Hasidic man's black coat, the Buddhist monk's saffron robe, the Zoroastrian sudre undershirt woven with symbolic pockets all whisper the same truth: that faith lives not just in prayers but in the warp and weft of daily life. Perhaps the most radical act these garments perform is their stubborn visibility. In an era where spirituality often gets relegated to private corners, religious dress refuses to hide. It challenges secular societies to expand their definitions of belonging, to recognize that diversity isn't just skin deep, but woven into the very fabric of public life. When a Hindu grandmother's sari palu billows on a subway platform, or a Rastafarian's dreadlocks swing past corporate cubicles, they're not just expressing identity. They're quietly rewriting the social contract, one sacred thread at a time. Gender fluidity in fashion isn't just a trend, it's a cultural earthquake shaking the very foundations of how we define identity through fabric. When Harry Styles graced the cover of Vogue in a billowing Gucci gown, the backlash from traditionalists proved just how revolutionary a single frock can be. That wasn't just a celebrity fashion moment, it was a Molotov cocktail tossed into the binary dressing room of history. Centuries of "this is for men" and "that is for women" are collapsing faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Drag culture, once relegated to underground ballrooms, has stormed the mainstream with the force of a rhinestone hurricane. What started as survival, queer communities stitching together personas from thrifted sequins and defiance, is now reshaping runways. Designers like Harris Reed don't just create clothes, they engineer experiences where tulle meets tailoring, where a single garment can whisper femme fatale one moment and dapper gentleman the next. Their work asks a radical question: why should fabric have a gender at all? Retailers are scrambling to keep up. Brands like Zara and H&M have quietly dismantled their boys and girls sections, replacing them with neutral zones where commo pants cozy up to lace tops. Even children's clothing aisles are undergoing quiet revolutions, with Target stocking unicorn t-shirts in the boys section and dinosaur prints in the girls. These might seem like small shifts, but they're seismic, each hanger silently challenging norms that have policed self-expression since the Victorian era. The most fascinating battleground is menswear's sudden flirtation with femininity. Billy Porter's tuxedo gown at the Oscars wasn't just a red carpet stunt, it was a reclaiming of space. For generations, women borrowing from menswear, think Marlene Dietrich in a tux, was seen as empowerment, while men embracing skirts risked ridicule. Now, stars like Lil Nas X and Timothée Chalamet are proving that vulnerability and strength can coexist in silk and satin. Historically, this fluidity isn't new, it's a homecoming. Before European colonization forced rigid gender norms globally, many cultures celebrated sartorial ambiguity. The Indian Hera community's glittering saris, native two-spirit individuals' blend of ceremonial dress, and Edo period Japanese kabuki actors' elaborate costumes all honored identities beyond binary. Today's movement isn't inventing gender-fluid fashion. It's excavating what oppressive systems tried to bury. Yet resistance lingers. Schools still send girls home for distracting outfits while policing boys' nail polish. Workplace dress codes cling to outdated norms that equate professionalism with gendered conformity, but the dam is breaking. When a teenager in Arkansas can wear a prom dress and beard without stirring gossip, when luxury houses like Balenciaga send male models down runways in stilettos, we're witnessing more than a style shift. We're seeing clothing finally catch up to the beautiful, messy spectrum of human identity. The frontier isn't just being explored, it's being redesigned stitch by stitch, with every sequin, ruffle, and deliberately ambiguous button down. The Scottish kilt's journey from battlefield to band relic to national icon reads like a thriller penned by history itself. After the brutal suppression of the Jacobite rebellion in 1746, Britain's Dress Act made wearing tartan a criminal offence, an attempt to sever Highlanders from their identity thread by thread. But what the English saw as mere fabric, Scots understood as encoded resistance. Each clan's unique tartan pattern wasn't just decoration, it mapped kinship networks older than the crown itself. When Victorian romantics like Sir Walter Scott later repopularized kilts, they weren't indulging nostalgia, they were stitching together a fractured nation. Today, that same garment swings defiantly at protests for Scottish independence, its pleats swaying like pages from a history book that refuses to close. Across the Atlantic in Mexico's Chiapas highlands, Maya women wield needle and thread like archivists preserving a civilization. Their huipiles, blouses embroidered with cosmological symbols, tell stories colonial powers tried to erase. A zigzag might trace the path of a sacred serpent, while diamond patterns represent the four cardinal directions. During the Zapatista uprising of 1994, these textiles became armor. Indigenous women facing down government tanks did so wearing huipiles stitched with ancestral visions of justice, turning their bodies into living manifestos. Now, as fast fashion floods markets with cheap copies, cooperatives like Jolam Maitik teach young women to read the stories in their grandmother's stitches, ensuring the language of thread outlasts the assault of globalization. Norway's bunad tradition reveals another layer of this sartorial resistance. What began as 19th century folklorists sketching disappearing rural dress evolved into a nationwide movement to reclaim pre-industrial identity. Today, over 80% of Norwegians own at least one bunad, not as costume but as citizenship made visible. Each region's specific embroidery motifs and silver brooches function like wearable deeds, proving belonging predates modern borders. When far-right groups recently co-opted bunads for nationalist rallies, Norwegians responded by dressing immigrants in heirloom pieces for citizenship ceremonies, rewriting who gets to wear the story. Perhaps no garment carries this paradox more powerfully than the Palestinian thobe. Its intricate Tatri's embroidery, once a village woman's creative outlet, became a resistance symbol after the Nakba of 1948. Displaced women stitched their lost homes into dresses, cypress trees for Beit Dajan, orange blossoms for Jaffa, creating a map in thread. Contemporary designers now blend these traditional cross-stitch patterns with keffiyeh prints, turning runway looks into geopolitical statements. When a teenager in Ramallah wears a thobe with a Nike swoosh subtly worked into the embroidery, she's not abandoning tradition, she's claiming it as a living, evolving force. These national costumes endure not through museums but through reinvention. The Hawaiian aloha shirt, originally crafted from Japanese kimono fabric by plantation workers, was dismissed as tourist kitsch until sovereignty movements reclaimed its hybrid origins. Now, designers like Manaola use traditional copper cloth patterns to critique military occupation on international runways. In Wales, young musicians pair neon-dyed traditional shawls with Doc Martens, proving centuries-old wool can mosh pit with the best of them. What makes these garments timeless isn't their ability to preserve the past, but their power to carry it forward one defiant stitch, one rebellious pleat at a time. Future fabrics are rewriting the rules of clothing right before our eyes, not with needles and thread, but with Petri dishes and lines of code. Imagine slipping on a jacket that doesn't just repel rain, but generates electricity from the sunlight hitting its shoulders. This isn't science fiction. Companies like Photonic Textiles are already weaving solar threads into garments thin enough to fold into a pocket. Meanwhile, in a Berlin lab, researchers are culturing leather from mushroom roots, producing material indistinguishable from animal hide but without a single cow sacrificed. The process starts with mycelium, the fibrous network beneath fungi, which grows into sheets that can be tanned and dyed like traditional leather. The result? A handbag that's both vegan and biodegradable, dissolving back into the earth when you're done with it. But the real game changer might be what's happening inside our clothes rather than on their surface. Smart textiles embedded with microscopic sensors are turning fabric into a second skin that knows us better than we know ourselves. Take the Nadi X Yoga pants by Wearable X. Their knitted-in haptic feedback gently vibrates to correct your posture, like a personal trainer woven into the seams. Or consider the BioStamp by MC10, a flexible electronic patch stuck directly onto fabric that monitors heart rate, hydration, and even UV exposure, wirelessly syncing to your phone. These innovations aren't just convenient, they're quietly dismantling the boundary between technology and the human body. Color is getting a high-tech makeover, too. The days of dyeing fabric in vats of chemicals may be numbered, thanks to companies like Faber Future's programming bacteria to secrete pigments as they grow. Their living color process uses genetically modified Streptomyces microbes to produce vibrant hues that bond with fabric at a molecular level, cutting water waste by 90% compared to conventional dyeing. For those who crave constant reinvention, there's the Unseen Labels Air Collection apparel that shifts color when exposed to heat or touch, controlled entirely through an app. A swipe on your phone transforms a blue coat to gold, making the concept of a wardrobe feel downright archaic. Perhaps the most poetic fusion of old and new comes from Bold Threads, a company resurrecting one of nature's oldest marvels, spider silk, through biotechnology. By inserting spider DNA into yeast cells, they've created a fermentation process that brews liquid silk, which is then spun into fibers stronger than steel by weight. The implications are staggering. Imagine lightweight body armor with the flexibility of a T-shirt, or sutures that dissolve harmlessly after healing a wound. It's a full circle moment, marrying the ancient artistry of silk production with the precision of modern genetics. Yet for all these advancements, the most revolutionary aspect might be how they're challenging our very definition of clothing. When a dress can purify air by breaking down pollutants as demonstrated by London's Catalytic Clothing Project, or a sweater can harvest energy from body heat to charge your phone, garments stop being passive coverings and start functioning as symbiotic extensions of ourselves. We're not just wearing clothes anymore, we're hosting ecosystems of innovation where every fiber has a purpose beyond aesthetics. The loom's invention gave humanity the power to weave. These new technologies are handing us the tools to reweave reality itself. The line between cultural exchange and exploitation in fashion is as fine as a single thread, and just as easily snapped. Picture a music festival at Endor grinning under a war bonnet dripping with sacred eagle feathers, unaware that in many Native American traditions, such headdresses must be earned through acts of valor, not purchased with a credit card. This isn't just tone deaf, it's the modern echo of colonial trophy-taking, where spiritual symbols become costume props. Yet contrast that with the Maori design collective Tamaki Makarau, whose koru patterns, swirling motifs representing new life, are licensed ethically to global brands with profits funding indigenous art schools. The difference: consent and context. One reduces living traditions to aesthetic loot, the other transforms them into equitable dialogue. The fashion industry's track record reads like a ledger of extraction. In the 1920s, French designer Paul Poit exoticized harem pants and turbans, divorcing them from their Ottoman and Sikh roots to sell Orientalist fantasies. Fast forward to the 1990s, when Navajo prints appeared on runways without attribution or compensation. Their geometric precision, originally encoding creation stories, reduced to mere decoration. Even today, the bindi, a Hindu sacred mark, gets rebranded as festival glitter by beauty brands, while black protective hairstyles like Bantu knot surface on white models labeled as avant-garde updos. The pattern is unmistakable. Marginalized cultures get mined for visual capital while their people face discrimination for those same traditions. But there are glimmers of redress. When Nigerian designer Kenneth Ives collaborates with Yoruba weavers, he doesn't just source fabric. He amplifies their craft on Paris runways, ensuring the artisans' names are spoken alongside his. The Inuit-owned brand Inuk Chic licenses traditional parka designs directly from elders, turning ancestral knowledge into sustainable income. These models prove appropriation isn't inevitable, it's a choice. The key lies in who holds the pen. When Dior faced backlash for a Scottish-inspired collection lacking Highland input, they pivoted, hiring Scottish embroiderers for subsequent lines. It was a small step, but it acknowledged that patterns aren't free for the taking their chapters in someone's story. The most hopeful developments come from intellectual property law catching up with centuries of theft. In Peru, the government now requires brands to negotiate directly with indigenous communities before using their motifs, treating textile patterns like patents. New Zealand's Toi Iho trademark certifies authentic Maori artistry, offering consumers a way to distinguish genuine collaboration from cultural strip mining. Young designers are leading the charge too, like Mexico's Carla Fernandez, whose slow fashion label trains Zapotec weavers in business ownership so they're partners, not just suppliers. Navigating this terrain demands humility. Wearing a kimono under the guidance of a Kyoto sensei differs vastly from tossing on a geisha costume for Halloween. Admiring Ghanaian Kent cloth is worlds apart from slicing it into bikinis without context. The litmus test, ask who benefits, is the origin community centered or sidelined? Are traditions honored or hollowed? Clothing will always borrow, but it's time we moved from taking to asking, from erasure to equity. After all, the most beautiful fashions aren't those that mimic cultures, but those that respect their weight in every stitch. That lab coat you slip on before an experiment isn't just protecting your clothes, it's rewiring your brain. Northwestern University researchers discovered something astonishing. When participants wore what they believed to be a doctor's coat, their attention sharpened dramatically. outperforming peers in identical tasks while dressed casually. The phenomenon, dubbed enclothed cognition, reveals a startling truth: clothing doesn't just cover us, it codes our behavior from the inside out. Think of it as mental origami. The right folds in fabric can crease your mind into new shapes. Consider the transformative power of color alone. Hospital studies show nurses wearing cheerful scrubs in coral or lavender receive higher patient satisfaction scores than those in traditional white, not because their care changes, but because the brain reads warmth into those hues. Fast fashion brands exploit this relentlessly, stocking serotonin-boosting yellows and pinks during gloomy winter months, while corporate offices default to navy and gray, a visual sedative meant to project stability. The inverse works too. When the University of British Columbia asked participants to solve puzzles while wearing red shirts, their performance plummeted under the weight of subconscious associations with danger and failure. Then there's the silent authority of tailoring. Harvard psychologists documented how subjects wearing fitted suits adopted power poses, unconsciously standing taller, speaking slower, even dominating negotiations more effectively than those in off-the-rack separates. The stiffness of starched collars and structured shoulders doesn't just alter silhouettes, it fortifies mental frameworks, tricking the wearer into embodying the confidence their outfit implies. Conversely, the pandemic's endless stretch of sweatpants and slippers didn't just signal relaxation, it dissolved the psychological boundaries between work and rest, leaving many struggling to focus without their sartorial on switch. Athleisure's meteoric rise makes perfect sense through this lens. Yoga pants and moisture-wicking fabrics don't just promise physical flexibility, they broadcast an ethos ready for anything but never confined. Silicon Valley's hoodie uniform, pioneered by Zuckerberg, wasn't just about rejecting suits, it was a power move disguised as nonchalance, proving you could dominate a boardroom while dressed for a dorm room. Even children experience this. Kindergartners assigned superhero capes during challenging tasks persist longer and collaborate better than peers in plain clothes, proof that identity isn't just expressed through dress, but actively constructed by it. The most profound implications emerge in therapeutic settings. Occupational therapists now prescribe mood dressing for depression patients, using tactile fabrics like weighted vests or soft cashmere to regulate nervous systems. Dementia patients dressed in era-appropriate clothing show improved memory recall, their outfits acting as time machines woven from thread. And in a stunning reversal of dress for success, chronic pain sufferers report relief when wearing flowing, unrestricted garments that symbolically reject the body's constraints. What we're witnessing is the collapse of the old adage, the clothes make the man. Neuroscience confirms it's far more radical. The clothes remake the man, woman, or child moment by moment. From the lab to the living room, every zipper pulled, every button fastened, is a silent negotiation between who we are and who we're becoming. The next time you reach for an outfit, ask yourself, not just what does this say about me, but what might it do to me? The answer might just hang in your closet, waiting to transform you from the outside in. From the linen wraps of pharaohs to the algorithms styling our avatars, clothing remains humanity's most intimate archive. It's not just fabric, it's a living museum of who we've been and who we're becoming. Consider this, the same hands that once wove flax for Tutankhamun's burial shroud now program 3D knitting machines to craft seamless athleisure. The impulse hasn't changed, only the tools. For millennia, our garments have whispered secrets about power, survival, and rebellion, sometimes so quietly we forget to listen. Take a moment to feel the weight of your own clothes right now. That cotton in your t-shirt, Its roots stretch back to enslaved laborers in 19th century Mississippi, to child workers in modern Uzbekistan, or perhaps to an organic farm in Texas reinventing the industry. The zipper on your jeans, a descendant of the same fastener that liberated women from corsets and helped soldiers gear up faster in World War II. Even the most mundane outfit is a palimpsest, layers of history pressed together like threads in a loom. We're standing at fashion's most consequential crossroads yet. On one path, the breakneck pace of microtrends and disposable outfits, where garments are worn less than 7 times on average before becoming landfill. On the other, a growing movement stitching sustainability into every step, from mushroom leather startups to apps that help you rent instead of buy formal wear. The choice isn't just about aesthetics, it's about what legacy we want to leave in the folds of time. When archaeologists of the future dig up our era, will they find mountains of polyester sludge or biodegradable flax tunics telling stories of reinvention? But here's the beautiful paradox. Even as technology hurtles us forward, the most revolutionary ideas often circle back. Indigenous communities practicing regenerative agriculture for natural dyes, Italian artisans restoring 19th century looms to reduce energy use, Japanese craftsmen teaching robots to replicate centuries-old sashiko stitching. These aren't rejections of progress. They're reminders that the most cutting-edge solutions sometimes hide in plain sight, waiting for us to rediscover them. So what's next? Maybe your great-grandchildren will wear algae-grown sequins that purify the air, or jackets woven from asteroid-mined fibers. Perhaps they'll revive forgotten techniques like knell-binding, that ancient Nordic method of knitting with a single needle just because it creates zero waste. Whatever comes, one truth remains: clothing will keep being our silent biographer, recording not just how we looked, but how we thought, fought, and dared to reimagine the world. Now it's your turn. The next chapter of this story isn't just written by designers and tech giants. It's shaped by every choice you make when you get dressed tomorrow. Will you be a passive consumer or an active participant in fashion's evolution? Drop your thoughts below. Let's make this conversation as vibrant and varied as the global tapestry of style itself. After all, history isn't just something we wear. It's something we weave together, one thread